back to We Are the Watchmen Weekly Live and Rip from the Headlines Live. This is a dual edition and mission critical. We are live in West Palm Beach at the Palm Beach Convention Center for the Believer Summit from Turning Point Faith. And with me today is historian Bill Federer. Bill, welcome back to the show.
Well, RC, great to be with you.
You know, the last time we talked about your new book. Give us an overview of how that's going now that the book is out, and then we'll jump into the topic for today.
Yeah, well, it's tremendous. I just did a session this morning on it, and it's, in New England, you had pastors and churches founding cities.
Yeah.
So literally you had a pastor, Roger Williams, and his church founded Providence, Rhode Island, and the first Baptist church in America.
Yep.
You had Pastor Thomas Hooker and his Congregationalist church found Hartford, Connecticut. So in other words, the church members had to be involved in politics because there was nobody else founding the city but the church.
Mm-hmm.
So they would have one building in town called the Meeting House. That's where the pastor would teach the Bible, and that's where they do their city business. Right? So we have an entire century of these colonies being formed with these pastors with their congregational model of church government influencing their congregational model of city government. And so it wasn't until the 1700s that you had this concept of when you really become a Christian, you should withdraw from worldly things like government, right? And so it brings up an interesting scenario because if all the spiritual people withdraw from government, who's left to be involved in government but the less spiritual? Like, duh.
Exactly.
And since they're less spiritual, they're going to yield to their ambitions and become power hungry. So it's almost like the devil has this, it's a chess game, right? If you can't beat them, join them. It's like if they can't stop people from having a personal experience with Jesus, then if they have the personal experience with Jesus, tell them that it's only personal. And forget what kind of country you're leaving your kids.
So, Bill, on that theme, Juliana has dug into the research on a topic that now that Kamala Harris is in the forefront, and I should preface this isn't a Democrat or Republican issue because there's issue on all sides with this. We were discussing the difference between natural born, birthright citizenship, and naturalized. So if I could, I want to set a primer for this because we said, what's actually going on here and what does natural born citizen mean? So we said, what better way to figure that out than to grab our favorite historian and talk about it. So if I could, I want to read Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 of the U.S. Constitution, and we'll get into this a bit more, okay? So this is what it says. No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States. So, Bill, as we understand, the framers were pretty clear on protecting us from foreign influence in the highest office in the land, right? Whereas with the Senate and Congress, you can be naturalized or birthright, and you can actually become a senator or a congressman, much like you can become a mayor or a city council person. But they held the presidency in a special place, and the language was specific. So John Jay had talked about this in letters and everything like that. But they didn't define what a natural-born citizen is. In your opinion, Bill, what are we dealing with this? Who's eligible, who's not eligible? What does this mean?
Right, so at first, it's definitely people that are born on American soil to American citizen parents.
Okay.
And then the idea was, well, what if it's an American territory and it's not yet a state? So you had people born in some of the Indian territories, and then later they became a state. And then you had people like John McCain, whose parents were in the military. They were stationed overseas. So he wasn't born, but he was born to American parents in an American territory. And then you have, so the Republicans pushed to have a little bit of a looser definition. And then Ted Cruz, right, because he was born and it wasn't in an American state. and then because the Republicans were pushing for this, then Obama comes along.
Right.
And so he's born, uh, according, there's questions, right?
Sure.
There's some testimony that he was born in Africa, and,
Right.
and other testimony that he was born in Hawaii, and Hawaii as a territory. But his father, according to some, was Barack Obama Sr.,
Right.
who was not an American citizen.
Correct.
He was a student. The mother, Ann Dunham, was, so that's questionable. But you had both Republicans and Democrats pushing for a looser definition of natural-born citizen. So now that Kamala is running, you have both sides saying, well, wait a second, we sort of, gave a looser definition of it, and now it's hard for us to put our foot down and say, wait a second, she wouldn't fit that definition if we were to have an original interpretation of what natural-born citizen is.
So, Bill, it almost feels like, kind of getting back to your book for a second, is this one of the silence equals consent situations for the American citizenry? Is it because we chose not to tackle the issue or to push for a definition that the door is open for something like this to happen, in your opinion?
Yeah, so you have, I look back at history. So Rome was a republic with 600 senators from about 527 BC up until Julius Caesar.
Right.
Around 45 or so BC. And Julius Caesar, they had a position called dictator, but it was a one-year emergency position in time of war. And Julius Caesar just wanted himself to be a dictator for life.
Aha.
And just continue the emergency. But he wanted to do good. He wanted to have building projects in Rome, and they had the water problem. And so it was this concept that, in a time of emergency, we can depart from this. Well, there's a saying that if leaders can usurp power in times of emergency, then they would want to create emergencies so they could usurp power. And that brings up, it goes back to Pericles. So Athens was a democracy. They
Right.
had 6,000 citizens, and around 431 BC, Pericles was getting a little too popular. He was getting a little too powerful. And so there was talk of ostracizing him, which was where you would have 6,000 citizens that could vote to have you kicked out of town for 10 years, and it would cancel your political career. So Pericles was about to get canceled. They were about to use the 25th Amendment on him, so to speak. They were about to impeach him. And so he intentionally let relations with Sparta deteriorate into a war. And once there was a war, the Peloponnesian War, everybody wanted a strong leader. So that set the precedent where you have a leader in a democracy or republic who's losing popularity will intentionally want to get the country into a war. So you saw that with Bill Clinton. He's running for re-election. There's the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and he fires some missiles into Serbia. And we get involved in the Bosnian-Serbian war. And, for a while, the attention was off of him. But you see this reiteration over and over again that when leaders are becoming them. So dictators have two tools in their toolbox, fraud and force.
Yeah.
Fraud is they will lie to you and take away your freedoms because they're telling you they're doing it for your own good. And as long as you believe the fraud, then they stay in power and they take away your freedoms. But when you stop believing the fraud, then if they're dropping in popularity, they can't lie their way out of it.
Right.
Their only other tool is force. So that's when they would purge the military, purge the law enforcement of anybody with morals, anybody with virtue, all they want is yes men. It's just a gang style. It may as well be the Bloods and the Crips.
Wow.
All they want is a gang style. They're at the top. You do what they say or they kill you.
So, Bill, you've literally described what's happening as we sit here in July of 2024 in the current political climate. You've given us a journey in history that basically leads up to everything that you just said, in a way is what we're living right now. So I want to do two other things here because we're going to link to all the case law and opinions on this and everything, but there are 2 points that stuck out to me. I want to share them with you and get your take. The first one was during the Constitutional Convention because the original writing of this clause in the Constitution just said citizen. So I want to read this to you and I want to get your take. On July 25th, 1787, which that anniversary just passed, John Jay wrote a letter to George Washington that said the following: permit me to hint whether it would be not wise and associable to provide a strong check to the admission of foreigners into the administration of our national government, and to declare expressly that the command-in-chief of the American Army shall not be given to, nor devolve on, any but a natural-born citizen. So what happened after that, the Committee of Detail originally proposed that the president must merely be a citizen, but then they changed it. The Committee of 11 changed it to natural-born citizen. Bill, what this says to me is that the framers were paying such close attention to what needed to happen to protect us that John Jay, first Supreme Court Justice, steps up and says, wait a minute, this isn't clear enough. In your opinion, does that make the case for what we're talking about with the difference between a natural-born citizen, a naturalized citizen, and what we now know as birthright citizenship?
Yeah, those are critical issues that you're bringing up.
Yeah.
And they understood that your allegiance tends to be with your heritage. I talked about the Roman Empire. Toward the end of the 3rd century, Rome began to be invaded.
Right.
So you had China began to build their Great Wall of China. And the Huns could no longer attack into China as easily, so they turned westward. And it started a domino effect of displaced tribes across Central Asia. The Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Anglo-Saxons, Lombards, Jutes, and they would come over. They were like illegal immigrants, so to speak. And so the Romans, they got into having fewer children. And it's a phenomenon that Will and Ariel Durant noticed. They studied, dozens of ancient civilizations, Babylonians, the Romans, the Greeks, and they found out that as civilizations became more civilized, they waited longer to have children and had fewer of them. And the less civilized had more kids and started earlier. And so he says, in this way, nature seems to punish where the uncivilized end up overrunning the civilized because there's more of them, and they it got so bad that Julius Caesar actually forbade women who had no children from riding in the carriages that they didn't have wheels, but they would carry them on their shoulders, and then a certain stylish dress, but still he couldn't. And so some of the Roman families would adopt a slave into the family and make him part of the inheritance because the women didn't want to have, the kids. And so you had Visigoths,
Right.
and they first learned the Latin language. They they get involved in the military, and they would be stationed on the border to do what? To keep out the Visigoths. It's like, it's like, well, I'm in the Romans, I'm in the Roman military and everything, but they are my cousins.
Wow. So the fox is guarding the hen house.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you had the Rhine River froze one winter, and a bunch of the Visigoths came across, and nobody drove them out, and they stayed, and they kept their own language, and then as this happened more and more, and the Romans decided that they didn't want to let the common people have weapons, only the military class.
Sounds familiar.
And so, because if they gave all the people weapons, they could overthrow the leaders, so
Right.
they didn't want to have that. So, but the military was not meeting their recruitment goals, so to speak, and they had to stretch their military across the frontiers, and so consequently, these groups would come across and stay, and they kept their own language, their own culture, and it broke up the unity of the Roman Empire. And one of the interesting observations is you need people coming in,
Right.
but you need them to come in at a speed that they can assimilate.
Right.
So I tell people, how much food do you eat in a year? Imagine if I were to sit you down and make you eat that in a day.
Ooh,
you would die.
you die.
You only eat food as fast as your body can assimilate it.
Right.
You need people coming in. They help the economy. They bring new ideas. They bring new vitality. But you bring them in only as fast as they can assimilate and become. Otherwise, they'll keep their own indigenous neighborhoods and cultures, and it breaks up.
Right.
It's sort of like the statue that Daniel saw with the head of gold,
Right.
and then the arms and chest silver, abdomen of bronze, and then the iron legs, and then it says the toes of iron and clay. Iron and clay don't mix. And so at that stage is when this statue falls over, is knocked over.
So, Bill, last one here, and I think I'm putting you on the spot a little bit because I'm digging in this. So, whatever context you can give us is helpful. There have been challenges to the constitutionality of the natural born citizen clause. One famous one, Czech Uyghur of the Young Turks, decided to challenge this. Another gentleman in 2012, Abdul Karim Hassan, filed several lawsuits on this. Their contention was that the clause and the term natural born citizen violates the 5th and the 14th Amendments, and that the 14th Amendment actually nullifies that clause. In your opinion, is that even remotely possible? Because both of these guys lost all of their cases, by the way. The courts agreed this is bupkis. In your opinion, though, one, is there even any standing and logic in doing this? That's question one. Question two, in your opinion, does this open the door for other people to try to challenge the same way?
Yeah, great questions. The overriding concept is different interpretations of the Constitution. And now the average thought would be the Constitution comes before the amendments. And so the writers of the Constitutions had intent. And so it would only make sense that you would go back and read the debates of the Constitutional Convention to try to figure out what the intent was.
Right.
So those type of justices are called originalists, right? And there's different names for them, but they basically want to stick with the original meaning.
Right.
Well, in the middle 1800s, you had Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution, and a guy named Herbert Spencer, and he wanted to apply evolution to other areas of academia, including law. And so he influenced Christopher Columbus Langdell, who was the head of the Harvard Law School.
Okay.
And he invented evolutionary law called case precedent theory. So instead of going back and trying to find out what the founders intended, forget them. You just take the most recent case and you can bend it a little bit.
Wow.
Bend the rebar. And so now you have two different, and so Harvard was the only law school in the country that taught this.
Wow.
Every other law school, you want to know what the Constitution means? Go back and read the debates. But Harvard, being the oldest university in America, began to influence the other ones until you had a Supreme Court Justice, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., graduated from Harvard, and he called it legal realism. But it was this progressive idea of law, and that the law is neither ukase or an edict from God, but an ever-evolving thing, changing to the changing economic and social issues of the day. In other words, it's only what the justices say. Well, you may as well just get rid of the Constitution and have an oligarchy.
Wow.
Because if they can bend it to whatever they want to say, so when you go back and you try to understand these decisions, common sense would say the people that wrote the Constitution would be the ones we would follow, not the amendments that came later.
Right.
But with these evolutionary justices, they would be like, well, we can have it evolve.
Wow, Bill, I'm blown away. I think that what you just described kind of comes back to where we started. The mess that we're in is largely of our own creation, in the sense that silence equals consent. And you always say one is a sin of omission, the other is a sin of commission. And it's like we're here in yet another place that's critical to the structure of our republic, that we've just been willy-nilly about, and this is the result. And I know we're out of time. There's never enough time when we talk to you, but where can people find you and your information in the book?
Well, thank you, RC.
Yeah.
My website's AmericanMinute.com, and I send out a history email that you can sign up for. It's free.
Yep.
And then the title of this book is Silence Equals Consent, the Sin of Omission. Speak now or forever lose your freedom.
Amen. Bill Federer, thank you so much, my friend. Guys, you can find more information at wearethewatchmen.org and sherlockexposes.com. Thanks for joining us, and a big thanks to our friends at Taken TV for the use of their booth at this event. We'll see you soon.